In this part 2 of the tutorial, we will be adding some persistent data to our level progression so that we can keep track of some variables as the player moves through levels. Before I start on the persistent data, I want to make a couple of changes to my save points just to polish them up a little bit. So the first thing, if I want to make a change to all of my save points, if I hit the over arrow on one of them, then I can edit the prefab. And what I want to do first is reduce the volume. So I'm reducing the volume of all of the save points in all of the levels, not just the level I'm editing. So I'm going to bring that volume down to 0.6. And then when I hit the back arrow, it applies that change to all of the save points in this scene, as well as all of the save points in my second level as well. Now, if I wanted to change something about individual save points to make them unique from each other, instead of editing the prefab, I would just make the changes directly in the scene. So for example, if I want them to not all sound exactly the same, I could change the pitch of the save points, and I can change each one individually in the scene. So to add a little bit of variation, I might make one of them 0.9, and maybe I'll make one of them 1.1 for the pitch. And now that didn't change any of the other ones, so all the other ones are still at 1. So only the ones that I edited are different. And so I could use this to make them all distinct from each other, so it's not the same sound playing repeatedly. And that won't change any of the ones in the other scene. So I would need to save this scene and then open level 2 and make changes in level 2. But you can see that the volume change applied everywhere. So going back to level 1, now I have a little bit of variation for my save points. Now I'm going to go ahead and start working on some persistent data. So I'm going to go to my scripts folder and I'm going to create a new script called Game Manager, no spaces. And when you create a script called Game Manager, what you might notice is it turns into this gear icon. This is so that you can spot it easily in a folder of all of your scripts. The Game Manager script is usually treated a little bit differently than all of the other scripts just by the way that we write the code, but the change in the icon doesn't have any impact on how the code runs. This is just a visual indicator to help us find it more easily. On very large projects, you might have 30 or 100 scripts, and so being able to find the Game Manager easily is really helpful. So let's go ahead and open up that script. Now what I want to do with my Game Manager is I want to make some public variables up at the top. And I don't need the start or update function right now. All I need is a public int, and the first variable I'm going to use here is I'm going to keep track of the total number of things that I've collected. So in the player script, we are keeping track on each level so that we know when to progress to the next level. But I want a master version of that that keeps track of all of the collectibles through the entire game. So I'm going to call this variable total collected. No spaces. Now, I also want to have a text displayed on the screen that is keeping track of the total amount of things that I've collected. So at the very top in my using section, I'm going to add using Unity engine dot UI. This will allow me to access text in the scene. So I'm going to make now a public text called collected text. Now, if I go into my scene, I need to put the game manager in a scene so that so it will actually run and I can have access to those public variables that I made. But unlike the level manager and the player, which exist in every scene, I only want the game manager to exist once, and the game manager is going to persist with me through the entire game. So I'm gonna make an empty game object in my very first scene. If you had a start screen, you would want that game object to be in your start screen. But for now, all I have is a first level. So I'm gonna create an empty game object called game manager in my very first level. And now I'm going to attach that game manager script to the game manager object. And I can see here I have the total collected variable and a text slot for the collected text. So for the text, I'm going to create a new UI text. And if I double click on this text, I can see where it is on the canvas. And I'm going to position this text in the top left corner. And what's really important when you put text on your screen is you want it to stay in the same spot regardless of the size of the screen. So there's two things we need to do to make sure that happens. The first is we need to bind it to this corner here. By default, everything is bound to the center. So I'm going to use this icon up here to bind to the top left corner. The other thing we need to do is we need to set our canvas to scale with screen size on the canvas scaler option. This will make it so that when the screen gets resized for different screen sizes, that the canvas will scale up with it rather than keeping everything at the same pixel size. So now I can make some changes to my text. I'm going to make the text yellow. I'm going to give it an outline. And I'm going to make it much larger. Let's try 33. When I make the font size larger, you'll notice that it disappears. That's because I also need to increase the width and height. But you want to make sure that you are not scaling text. You should never use the scale tool on text because that will cause it to become blurry and pixelated and it won't look very good. So for the actual text itself, I'm going to say coins 0. So this will be displaying how many coins I have. Now I actually want this canvas to be part of the game manager. That way they will move through all of the scenes together. So I'm going to take this whole canvas object and drag it onto the game manager to make it a child. And then with my game manager selected, I can drag the text object into the text slot. Now we don't have any code for this yet, so what's going to happen is the text does not update when I collect these, but also once I collect all of them, it doesn't actually persist with me to the next level. So we need to add some code to the game manager to make that happen. So back in my game manager script, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my start function back in there. I actually did not need to remove it. And in my start function, I want to call a function called don't destroy on load. And the thing that we don't want to destroy is the game object that this script is attached to. So now this game object will not be destroyed when Unity loads from one scene to another. I'm going to save this script, and just to see this in action, we're going to go ahead and hit play and test it out. We still don't have it updating the text for the things we're collecting, but you'll notice over here in the inspector, I now have a new section that says don't destroy on load. So in this section is everything that's not going to be destroyed when I load the next scene. So here I can see I still have my coins, and this don't destroy on load section is still here. So everything in this section will still be here for the entire game. If I was to reload level 1, it would actually create a new instance of the game manager, and I would have 2 versions of the game manager in here. So one of the things that I would want to be careful of if I was going to load back to the first scene is to make sure that I'm destroying the extra version of the game manager. I don't want to have 2 versions trying to run at the same time. So let's update the text based on when we collect something. So I'm going to add a new function. This is going to be a public function because I want to be able to call it from my player script. The player script is keeping track of when I collide with a collectible, so I want to add a function that I can call from my game manager. I'm going to name it CollectCoin. And when I call this function, I want to add 1 to my total collected, and I want to update the text value of my collected text. So collected text dot text equals coins, and with the plus sign for text, this is a concatenate, so I'm taking whatever text is here and I'm adding whatever text I put next, and I'm going to put the variable total collected here. And save that. And now in my player script, I need to call that function. So when I collide with a collectible, I'm going to do this as the very first thing that happens when I collide with a collectible. I'm going to do GameObject.find GameObject with tag, singular, no S, GameObject with tag. And the tag I'm going to use is Game Manager. I haven't made this tag yet, so I want to make sure I spell it the same way when I add the tag to my tag list. And then I'm going to do .getComponent Game Manager dot, and then the name of the function that I created, which is called CollectCoin. Now I'm getting this squiggly red line again, just like I got with the level manager, and I think this is the same Visual Studio bug that I was having before. So I think what I need to do is close out of Visual Studio and reopen the C# project from the Unity project folder. So I'm going to try to sort this out right now. Alright, so I managed to resolve it in a slightly different way this time, which I want to share with all of you in case you run into this bug as well. So if you have the Solution Explorer window open in Visual Studio, if you don't have it, you can reset window layout to the default and it should appear here in the side panel. You might notice that not all of your scripts show up in this list. And so for me, the one that was missing was Game Manager. And what you can actually do is you can right click on your scripts folder and add existing item and then browse to where your missing script is saved. So what I did was I added the Game Manager, which was missing from this list. And so now when I have my player script open, we can see that the Game Manager no longer has a red squiggly line. And if I open my Game Manager, I actually had some things that were not coloring correctly previously. So the text here was not turning this teal color. So now all of this is sorted out. Let me open all my scripts back up. This is a recent issue, by the way, that has been happening for me with Visual Studio, pretty much just starting with Unity 2019. I've had it happen on a couple of different computers. Sometimes uninstalling and reinstalling fixes it. Other times it just continues to happen. So hopefully someone at Microsoft or Unity will fix that soon. All right, so where were we? So now we have our player script is going to call this function from our game manager, this CollectCoin function, every time we collect something. So let's try it. Oh, and you know what? I did not tag my game manager. So as I mentioned in our script for our player object, we're finding with tag. So we actually need to tag the game manager with that. So select the game manager game object and add a new tag to our tags list. Make sure you spell it the same that you spelled it in the script. And now I'm going to apply that tag to my game manager object. Now we should be able to collect things. And we can see the text updates when that happens. And when we progress to the next level, our coins text is still displaying our total number, including the previous level. So now we have some persistent data that's coming with us from one level to the next. Since I have the game manager set up to play through all of the scenes, I can actually add something that might be useful here, which is a screen fade between levels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a panel. Panels by default stretch to cover the entire window. And I'm going to change the alpha. If you select the color here, you can change the alpha to be solid. And usually a screen fade is black, so let's use black. Now, one thing you might notice is that the panel is covering up the text as well, and you can rearrange things on the canvas. They are sorted in order, things at the bottom render in front. So whatever is the bottom thing will be the thing that renders in front. So I want my panel to actually cover the text. So what I want to do for this panel is I want to add an animation to it so that I can animate it to fade in and out. So I'm going to create a new folder called Animations. And in this folder, I'm going to create a new animation called Fade In. And then I'm going to make a second one called Fade Out. And if I just take one of these animations, so start with Fade Out, and drag it onto the panel, what happens is it creates a Animator controller for me. Now, I don't want to drag both of them onto the panel because I've already created my Animator controller. So now what I can do is I can go to Window, Animation, and then Animator, and this Animator controller is now displayed here. So what I have here is this Fade Out animation, and it's set up to be the default animation that plays, and that's actually okay. A lot of times if we're going to trigger animations, we would create an empty state first, but in this case, when the first level loads, I actually want the black screen to fade out, and then I will trigger the black screen to fade in, so I can drag this fade in animation when the level ends. So when the level ends, I'm going to trigger this one to play, and when a level starts, the first time the first level starts, it's going to play this automatically. But I will need to trigger it the next time I want it to play. So I'm going to go to my Parameters tab up here, and I'm going to add a couple of triggers. I'm going to have a Fade In trigger and a fade out trigger. And then from any state, so no matter what's happening, it can always make this transition to fade in, and it can also make the transition to fade out. And what I want to do is in this, for this transition, I'm going to add the condition fade out to trigger this animation to play. And for this transition, I'm going to add fade in. So now we just need to add into our code to call these triggers. Before we do that, I'm actually going to create the fading part of the animation. So let's select our panel and we'll go to Window, Animation, and then the animation window. And I like to dock this one at the bottom of the screen to make it a little easier to work with. And we're going to add a new property here, and on the image section we're going to hit the plus next to color. If you have a very small laptop screen, you may not see the plus. You may have a scroll bar at the bottom. You have to scroll to the right to get this little plus icon. So we're going to have this, we're going to use the alpha for this. And so what I want to do, this is my fade out animation. So you could use them in either order, depends on if you're describing fade out as fade the screen out or fade out as fade the panel out. But the way I set it up, I am fading the panel out. This is just sort of a wording, a semantics issue. It doesn't really matter what you call them. So I'm going to delete the last keyframe, and I actually want it to be a really short animation. So I'm going to slide my timeline over here to this 0, 10, and I'm going to set alpha to 0, and it automatically creates this keyframe here for me. And if I click on the game window, I can actually get a little preview of this animation. I could also hit play down here in the animation and see it's very fast. I might want it just a little bit longer than this. If you select the top keyframe, you can drag it along the timeline. So then I want to add the animation for fade in. So I'm going to select the fade in from this drop down. And once again, add property, image, color. And once again, I'm going to delete the last keyframe. This time, I actually want to change the first keyframe of the alpha to be 0. And then around the 15 marker, I'm going to set the alpha to 1. So this fades the panel back in. Now, one thing that I want to do, panels by default, actually let's close out of the animation for this. We want to make sure that we're not editing our animation anymore. So I'm going to close the animation tab. By default, panels have a raycast target, which makes it so that you can't click through the panel. If you have anything in your scene that can be clicked on, including if you can click on the ground to move your character around, or if you have any buttons or anything in the scene that you can click on, this would prevent that click from happening. So we want to uncheck the box for raycast target. So make it so that we can actually click through the panel. Now if I hit play, it should automatically fade. That was a pretty fast fade. Let's edit that animation again. So we'll go back to Window, Animation, and I'm going to change both of them. You can use the control and the scroll wheel, or actually just the scroll wheel, to zoom out this window. And I'm going to move this all the way over to 30. And then I'm going to do the same thing for fade in. And right click and close the animation tab. If you keep the animation tab open, sometimes you'll accidentally add keyframes just by moving things around or changing things in the scene. All right, so now we need to trigger the animation for the panel to fade back in and then also to fade out when we get to the next level. So what I'm going to do is in my game manager script, I'm going to add another public function, public void, and I'm going to call this next level. And so I'm going to have the game manager be the thing that controls when the level changes. So I'm going to add up at the top using Unity Engine .scene management. So it's previously how we were doing it in the player script. So in the player script, I can actually take out this section now using Unity Engine .scene management because we're moving all of this to the game manager. And so what I would want to do here, instead of having this line in my player script, I'm going to do Control X, and I'm going to paste that into my next level function. Then back in my player script, where I was previously loading the next level, now I actually want to I've already got this line up here for the get component game manager. So I'm going to copy this line and then dot next level and save the changes to my player script. Now in my game manager script, I don't want to immediately load this level. What I want to do is I'm going to make a private float. I'm going to call this level timer. And I'm going to add back in my update function. And in my update function, I'm going to use this level timer. So I'm going to update it on each frame. Level timer minus equals. And the way that the easy way to do timers is to subtract time dot delta time on each frame. Time dot delta time is how much time has passed since the previous frame. So since this runs every frame, it is keeping accurate track of how much time has passed. Then if our level timer is less than or equal to 0, this is where we actually want to call this scene manager dot load scene. Now I only want this to happen when I'm loading the next scene. So I'm going to add a Boolean up here, private bool called loading. And I'm going to check if loading, and then have an open curly bracket here, and then go down to the end of this and add your close curly bracket. So now this section of code will only run if this loading Boolean is true. So in my next level, this is the function I'm going to call when I should start loading the next level. So here I will set loading equal to true. And I want to make sure in the very beginning when I create this loading variable, I want to make sure it's equal to false at the beginning. And then I also want to set it to false when I actually perform this load. So here we'll set loading equal to false. Also, when I set my loading value equal to true, I also want to change my level timer and let's go ahead and do half a second, 0.5 f. F for float, so it allows this to be a floating point value. I also want to trigger the fade in animation. So I'll do get component animator dot set trigger fade in. This will fade in the black panel. And now when my timer reaches 0, I'll set loading to false. I'll load the next level, and then I want to trigger the fade out animation. So we'll do get component. I just realized this actually should be get component in children, because the panel is a child of the canvas, which is a child of the game manager. So get component in children will get the animator component of any child object. So I'm going to copy this, paste it up here, and change this to fade out. And save that. And let's see if that works. I would probably also want to add particle effects and sound effects when I collect these game objects. Very nice. All right, so now our screen will fade to black, and then it'll fade back to the game window. So that adds a nice little extra touch. So now we have a persistent variable that progresses through all of the levels with us. We also have a text display, and we fade in and out between the levels. And from the previous tutorial, we still have when the player dies, they respawn on the most recent save point. And they don't lose the things that they have collected when they die. So that does it for this tutorial on persistent variables with the save points and level progression. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please subscribe and come back for the next one.